Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ehren. Welcome to Question Period Canada, QPC. We've got a great episode today. We're hoping that Trudeau is going to be in the house to answer some questions. I know POILIEVRE would have a lot of questions for him, so would many others. They had last week off. They should all be well rested, back, ready to go. So, yeah, just before we get going, like, subscribe. We'll be trying this channel. We're doing this channel. You can check out my stuff. I've got, we're building a bank. Thanks for all the support. Let's jump into the show. Clown circuits. Question period. Questions orale. Let's go.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
All right. Straight to our guy. He has the questions.
Mr. Speaker, after the attacks by Hamas nearly 2 weeks ago, there are Canadians who are still in danger. 4,000 Canadians are looking for help from the federal government to get out of Israel. About 300 Canadians are trying to leave Gaza. And between 40,000 and 70,000 Canadians are in Lebanon. What is the government doing to protect Canadians that are in danger?
There's a lot of Canadians in trouble over there.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Oh, no.
Mr. Speaker, since this is the first time we are all in this house, since the horrible terrorist attacks by Hamas, allow me to say this. Canada is with the state of Israel and the Israeli people.
Her grandfather was a Nazi.
Canada is at the side of Israel and the people of Israel.
Ran a printing press.
And they can count on the continued support of Canada. We demand the immediate liberation of all hostages and unequivocally condemn the terrorist attacks done by Hamas.
Yeah, that's a lot for her to say. With her history, it's a lot.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Innocent lives, be they Palestinian or Israeli, Jewish, Muslim or Christian or otherwise, are all equally precious. Countless of those lives have been lost or put in danger as a direct result of the sadistic attacks of Hamas. And that was the purpose of those attacks, to exact maximum damage on both Israelis and Palestinians and thwart any attempt for peace. We know that the regime in Iran was behind these attacks. And we know that the most powerful organizer of terrorism in the world is the IRGC, which operates legally in Canada today. Will the government accept the Conservative common sense bill to criminalize the IRGC in Canada?
Do you guys know much about the IRGC in Canada?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
no.
This is the first time
we
are all present in this House since these horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas on the State of Israel and the Israeli people. So I would like to begin by being very clear in English this time. Canada stands with the State of Israel and with the Israeli people. Israel can count on Canada's support. Canada condemns unequivocally Hamas's terrorist attacks, and we call for the immediate release of all hostages.
Is condemnation enough, do you think? I'm not one to...
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Last fall, the Finance Minister promised a balanced budget within 6 years. Last spring, she broke that promise and said that we'd have a balanced budget. Never. And last week, the Parliamentary Budget Officer revealed that her deficit is now 15% bigger than she said it was only 6 months ago. Has the government lost total control of our debt? And how much is this inflationary spending going to add to the interest rates Canadians pay on their mega mortgages?
I'm nervous about my next mortgage. The interest payment I'm going to get.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
That's inflation,
Mr.
guys.
Speaker, our government will be providing an update on our debt and deficit figures and on our revenues in the fall economic statement in due course. when it comes to Canada's fiscal position, let me also be very, very clear. Canadians should listen to the independent ratings agencies whose job it is to evaluate Canada's position and not the partisan talking Canada down attacks of the opposition. Canada's AAA rating has been reaffirmed by ratings agencies since the budget. We are strong fiscally.
She seems to think it's all okay.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Apparently,
she hasn't
former Liberal Finance
to balance my
Minister
budget.
John Manley is just a partisan using talking points when he says that this government's inflationary deficits are like pressing on the inflationary gas pedal and forcing the Bank of Canada to press on the brakes with higher interest rates. Canadian families have the highest debt load of any country in the G7, and those debts are colliding with the rates that this government is driving up. Will the Finance Minister cancel their inflationary deficits, balance the budget to bring down interest rates and inflation, or will she admit that she's just not worth the cost?
It's a little bit rhetorical there. I think he knows the answer to the question. Don't you?
Mr. Speaker, let me again bring
It's all
some
okay. Don't worry about it.
independent, non-partisan facts to this conversation. It is the job of the ratings agencies to determine the fiscal sustainability of every country's fiscal position. And ratings agencies have reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating.
I don't know, man.
And you know why they did that, Mr. Speaker?
Believe a
because
word?
we have
You?
the lowest deficit in the G7. And because, Mr.
keep
Speaker, we
bringing that
have
up.
the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We believe in fiscal responsibility, Mr. Speaker, and the numbers show it.
Condescending to people is bad enough,
The Honourable Leader
but
of
you
the
don't need to
Opposition.
do it.
Nonpartisan voice that I'm interested
you're
in is the
deceiving them.
shipyard worker in Vancouver who told me that his mortgage payment has now risen to $7,500 a month.
What?
$7,500 a month for a shipyard worker and a middle-class family. That proves that this Prime Minister, after 8 years, is not worth the cost of mortgage payments. According to John Manley, Liberal Finance Minister,
flipping the Liberals
their
against the
deficits
Liberals.
are driving up interest rates on the back of mortgage holders. Will she reverse these deficits so that we can bring down inflation and interest rates before the shipyard worker and millions of Canadians lose their homes?
Do you guys have to deal with a mortgage and the interest rate? Like, how you renegotiate that every
The
few
Deputy Prime
years?
Minister.
5 years?
Speaker, talk is
Not
cheap.
gonna get a good one.
But actions speak louder than words. If these conservatives actually believed in supporting Canadians during the housing crisis, they would be supporting Bill C-56. This includes a critical measure lifting the GST on all new rental construction that will get more homes built faster. The Conservatives should actually act in the interests of Canadians and not continuing to parrot their talking points, Mr. Speaker.
Do you think that getting rid of the GST for builders is a solution
The
for
Honourable
you?
Member Bellechambly.
Monsieur le Président, et à mon tour,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also wish to
I wish
congratulate
it were
you.
true. I
The
hope
United States created a group
things
of
get better.
5 powers, including Germany,
nice
Italy,
tie.
the United Kingdom, and
Sharpens
France,
words.
to speak with a stronger voice in the face of the crisis that the entire world is facing, which is centered on Gaza. Canada, disappointingly, was not invited to participate in spite of the importance of the Jewish community here in Canada. Did the government ask to be part of this group?
Or were they just like not allowed to come? Or were they
The
just
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
not
Thank
invited?
you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canada is an important member
Imagine how annoying her voice must be in
of the
French.
G7. And last week, I went to Morocco, and the ministers of finance for the
Just a quick
G7,
trip to
this was the
Morocco.
first in-person group of G7 ministers, confirmed our support for the state of Israel, the people of Israel, and together we condemned the terrorist attacks led by Hamas.
What
The
a
honourable
face,
member
man.
for Bellechambly.
président de toute évidence,
I used
Unfortunately,
to like all those people. I
The
used to
United
hope
States State Department didn't see things that way because it simply did not invite
he is
Canada.
a sharp-dressed
And it's
guy.
deplorable because it prevents the government from doing its work
Look at that
well
sport
for its own communities, its own citizens. This morning, I talked about the relevance and the opportunity for everyone here to talk along similar lines in order to defend the interests of the Canadian Jewish community and peaceful Muslims. If they could convene leaders to privately discuss the issues.
Then I have
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
All right, guys.
Thank
How
you,
about
Mr. Speaker.
we'll give me a like because we find
I
her annoying. So
very much
can we
appreciate
get some likes and subscriptions?
reality
Because you
that
agree with
all
me?
members
She's
of
hard
this
to
House
tolerate.
are
This is
facing
fun to
members
watch,
of the Liberal
but-
Party, members of the Conservative Party, members of the Bloc, and members of the NDP.
It's a lot.
We are all ready to show that for us, condemning Hamas's terrorist attacks and supporting Israel is not a partisan issue. It's a Canadian issue. That's the reality, and it's very important.
Always with this partisan talk, right?
Mr. Speaker, we are all shocked by the brutality, the kidnappings, and the targeting of civilians,
lady.
including the elderly and children, by Hamas militants. And now the region is spiraling. Thousands of innocent Palestinians and Israelis have been killed in a conflict that they are not responsible for. Today we learned a fifth Canadian was murdered, and we know more Canadians are amongst the captives. What is this government doing to ensure the hostages are protected and returned to safety?
Then I have this.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you very much,
Lord.
Mr. Speaker, and I am glad to also hear the honourable colleague from the NDP be clear in her condemnation of these terrorist attacks. It is very important to show that this is not a partisan issue for Canada. Clearly, I share and our
Rhetorical, these
government
guys.
shares her concern for the hostages, and we call for their immediate release.
Then I have Deputy
I always feel like I'm
The
getting in
Honourable
trouble.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
They're profoundly alarmed by what we are witnessing in Gaza. The UN has said that nearly half of Gaza's people have been forced to flee from their homes and that morgues are overflowing. This is a humanitarian crisis of extreme proportions. It took almost a week for the minister to start paying attention to the impact this war has had on Palestinians, even though thousands of people have been killed. Israelis and Palestinians have the right to live in peace. Why won't this government stand up for international law and call for a ceasefire?
Hear, hear.
My green screen is playing a trick on her top.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Interesting.
Our government is very clear that we support the state of Israel, and we recognize Israel's right
It's laughable.
to defend itself within
So
international
condescending, man.
law. As the Prime Minister has said,
It's fun. It's
we
like
are
it's
deeply
funny.
concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. International law must be respected, and Canada will continue to support civilians of Gaza facing urgent humanitarian needs. That's why we
Straight
announced
from the
an initial
paper.
commitment of $10 million in humanitarian assistance to trusted partners. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
How does a person like that become such a powerful person?
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Talking to
Years of
people
failed
like that.
liberal
I don't
NDP
understand.
policies,
I like this guy.
finance
He's
minister
fun.
experiences inflation much different
Very
than
well
everyday
spoken.
Canadians. Her enormous inflationary deficits led to 40-year highs in inflation that caused the Bank of Interest rates to go up more than ever in history, and they're just not worth the cost. After promising to balance the budget, her own budgeting watchdog called her out, proving liberal deficits could reach almost $50 billion this year. I guess budgets don't balance themselves after all. Can the finance minister tell Canadians how much she's adding to the federal debt this year, or are we asking for too much?
Go in. It's the first time they've been clapping in a while.
Ministre des
Good for you.
Finances.
Mr. Speaker, our government will provide an update on the fiscal picture, both expenses and revenues, in the fall economic update in due course. But let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, because I do not want Canadians
Look at
to
that.
be misled
lemon-faced
by
clown.
alarmist, partisan talking points from the opposition. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that Canada's position is fiscally responsible. We have the lowest debt and deficit in the G7, and our AAA rating has been reaffirmed.
It's
by
AAA
our
rating.
ratings agencies.
Guys, it's a bunch of bullshit.
Then I
They
have
keep your rating
Honourable
high so
member
you
for
can
Calgary
continue to
Forest Lawn.
borrow.
Finance minister is known
Like,
for speeding up just for the
Lord.
wrong reasons. By adding more debt than every government before them combined, she put the pedal to the metal on her deficits and revved up inflation. And unlike an Alberta highway, the consequences of her spending isn't just a speeding ticket. It's a bigger deficit, higher inflation that led to higher interest rates,
She got a
putting
speeding
Canada most
ticket.
at risk in the G7 for a mortgage default crisis. After 8 years, they're definitely not worth the cost. Is
Nice
the
shot.
finance
It's
minister
good.
going to
It's
blow
funny.
through her budget deficit projections
See, it is fun, guys.
again? Buy more than $6 billion, yes or no?
He's fun, that guy.
Then I have
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Oh, Lord.
Mr.
Oh,
Speaker,
come on.
our
Goodness
government will
gracious.
provide an update on our fiscal position, on expenses, and on revenues in the fall economic update in due course this fall. But I do want to be very, very clear
Very,
on
very,
Canada's
very,
fiscal
very,
position.
very,
I was
very.
at the IMF World Bank
These people, man.
Finance Ministers meeting just last week, and that is where it was so clear that Canada has the best, the lowest deficit, the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. Our position is enviable, Mr. Speaker.
I'd be flushing the toilet. We need a courtesy
Honourable
flush
member
after
for
this much
Simcoe North.
Mr.
Christia
Speaker, it's nice
Freeland.
to welcome back the finance
awesome.
minister. I was
He can be
beginning to
funny
think that She
sometimes.
forgot the address of this
Alex
location.
Chambers.
After 8 years,
Adam
Canadians
Chambers,
are
pardon me.
realizing that this government's not worth the cost. Canadians are struggling, and this government continues to increase its deficits and inflation. Everyone now agrees that deficits increase interest rates. So will the finance minister finally confirm for Canadians that she'll balance the budget so that interest rates can come down and Canadians can keep their homes?
I'd like to remind members that we are not to make an indirect or direct relationship to whether the presence of the members in this House or not.
Where is Trudeau?
Because
He
as
played
you know,
hooky all
according
week
to the
last
rules,
week.
Members have
Greg
responsibilities to
Fergus,
sometimes
who's very
take them out of
pleasant
this place.
sounding and
I'll
looking,
have more to say on this later on this week.
talks
The
way too
Honourable,
much.
Vice-
He's trying to keep control that he's
Deputy
never going to
Prime
have.
Minister and Minister
Needs
of
to
Finance.
improve his hearing.
Thank you for that important comment, Mr. Speaker. But I
Everything's condescending
to
into this.
confirm
clown.
that I was not in the House of Commons last week. In fact, none of us were.
Okay.
Because
Okay, fair enough. I'll pick on her, but she has a point. They were all away. But where are we today? Playing hooky, Trudeau? Is that where you are? Who knows? Hopefully you're okay. Just beaver fever, cabin fever. Oh, see, this is going to get old, Greg.
Deputy Prime Minister has 20 seconds left on her clock.
last week was, of course, a constituency week. And I was proud to be able to do my job at the IMF World Bank Finance Ministers meeting, in particular because the G7 finance ministers affirmed our shared condemnation of Hamas and shared support for the State of Israel. The first time G7 ministers had met in person, Canada was at the table.
Again, I'd like to remind members that I'm quite well aware of the time that members have to ask and to answer questions. The honourable member from Simcoe North.
Easy.
Speaker, while households are dealing with higher interest rates, taxpayers are now on a bigger hook. That's because interest on the debt is going up. The government projected just a few months ago that it'll spend $44 billion on debt servicing costs this year, but that assumed that interest rates would go down. Instead, interest rates have gone up. So will the Minister of Finance finally tell Canadians how much they're now on the hook for higher debt servicing costs because interest rates haven't come down?
Mr. Chambers is smooth today.
The The Honourable Deputy
Smooth.
Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker.
There's
our
other players
government
on the Liberal side that are more
will
entertaining than
state
the
Canada's
Deputy
fiscal
Prime Minister.
position, revenues,
Clown.
costs clearly in the
I feel like I'm getting in
economic
trouble.
statement in due course this fall. What the opposition clearly doesn't know or doesn't want to admit is that Canada's fiscal position is responsible, indeed is enviable, compared to our peer countries. This was reaffirmed by the independent ratings agency, DBRS Morningstar,
rating
which
agencies,
recently
guys,
reaffirmed
look into them.
our AAA rating,
bullshit.
and by S&P, which reaffirmed it after the budget.
L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles.
All right.
Mr. Speaker, the
All
Parliamentary
right.
Budget Officer is expecting for the federal deficit to hit
Pierre-Paul Huz is
over
fun.
46 billion next year. That's 16% higher than the original Liberal
Him and
government
Gerard are a
projections.
lot of fun, these two.
Interest rates are unlikely to go down before April of next year. During a housing crisis, that's a disaster.
Get off
Can
the
Minister
paper, though.
of Finance confirm that we're going to be paying $6 billion more in interest next year?
L'honorable
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government will confirm budget numbers in the fall economic update. However, today, I want to highlight a very important reality, a reality that should be reassuring for all Canadians. Canada's fiscal outlook is very strong. Our deficit and GDP ratio is the lowest of all G7 countries, and our AAA credit rating was reconfirmed by credit rating agencies.
Like going to the doctor and them saying, well, at least you're not dead. There's dead people. There's,
Mr.
like,
Speaker,
there's
does
people
the
that have it
minister
so
know
much
that about
worse
20% of mortgage
than
loans
your
are
condition.
now at
Doesn't mean
a
our condition's good.
negative rate, which means that they cannot pay more than interest. That's the inevitable result of increasing inflationary expenditures. No one listened, not the Bloc or the Liberals. After 8 years of distress management, will the
Bloc
Liberals
swings,
rein
right?
in their expenses to help mortgage payments go down so that Canadians can keep their homes?
L'honorable
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Speaker, I thank the honourable
All
member
right,
for the
we-
question, but it's confusing to me.
Sexy
that he
Sean
would pose such a
Slick in the
question
house.
when he has a plan that's actually going to increase the cost of building homes and increase the cost of Canadians for
Light-
living
light-
in them.
lighten it up
His
a little
plan
bit.
literally is to add taxes to home building in this country and to cut funding that's going to build more homes for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, over the course of our time in this House over the last number of years, we have repeatedly put measures on the floor that are going to help improve the affordability of housing in this country. Time and time again, that member has voted against them. Thank you so much.
He's a Nova Scotian boy.
L'honorable député de
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, if Canada were
I think he's
part
the
of
best dressed person in
group
Parliament.
formed by the United States to face the crisis between Israel and Gaza, Canada would be participating in decisions and have information firsthand. Is the government, or can the Deputy Prime Minister tell us as of today, if humanitarian pathways will be opened into Gaza and opened for civilians towards Egypt?
There's a lot of concerns for
The
what's
Honourable
going on in
Minister
Gaza.
of International Development.
I just want to assure the honourable member that Canada was the first Western country to actually announce humanitarian assistance to civilians in Israel and Gaza. Not only
Well,
that,
good on us. I'm not
announcing
surprised if
so
that's
early
true.
and so quickly, we've actually
Good
incentivized
moment.
other partners to move forward. We're working with partners in the region and our trusted international organizations to ensure that we have access to civilians both in Gaza and Israel. We're working diligently, and as events move forward, we'll continue to insist on international humanitarian access to civilians in Gaza.
He's a little laid back, but he doesn't read from the paper there.
Honourable
That
Member for
I like
Legislation.
that. That means a lot to me.
Mr. Speaker,
Here we go. It
the
doesn't
Bloc
look good
Québécois
straight off the paper.
firmly condemns the terrorist attacks by Hamas and I reiterate that Israel has the right to defend itself. However, Hamas must be distinguished from all Gazans and the Palestinian people. Last Tuesday, the UN called for a humanitarian corridor to Gaza for medical reasons. This is the basis of Article 3 of the Geneva Declaration of the Protection of Civilians, saying that the wounded and sick shall be collected and cared for. What is Canada doing in real terms to ensure that Israel does just that?
The Honourable Minister for International Cooperation.
Speaker, we are continuing with our long-standing position that in conflict areas, humanitarian access must be provided to civilians to ensure that there is access to life-saving food, medicine, and water. I spoke yesterday with our trusted international partners as well as organizations on the ground, both international and Canadian. They have pre-positioned supplies. We are the first country that has moved forward to provide much-needed humanitarian assistance, and we're insisting on that access so that we can deliver to citizens and civilians who need that medical supplies.
He's a little laid back, but he's probably nervous. He doesn't want to get in
Honourable
trouble
Member
with
for
Christia,
Lexington.
have that condescending voice come down
Well,
on
to
him.
send help, first, we need a humanitarian corridor. We insist on it because Canada's been marginalized on the world stage. Once again, Canada sitting on the sidelines while the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Italy are all working together. That is not acceptable.
We should lend them a
Mr.
canoe.
Speaker. When it comes to human rights, Canada has a role to play and must insist on playing it. Has the minister spoken directly with Israel about opening a humanitarian corridor into Gaza? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, we're deeply
All right.
concerned
Who do we
about
have?
this humanitarian situation in Gaza. A civilian is a civilian, and any loss of civilian life is deeply troubled. We continue to call for international law to be respected. The minister has been engaging directly with her counterparts in the region about the need for a humanitarian corridor to provide rapid and unimpeded access for relief, and she will continue to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Where was Trudeau today? Not that I'm taking attendance for everybody, but
The Honourable Member for Kelowna, Lake
Trudeau
Country.
should be
Speaker,
there.
after 8 years, the NDP Liberal government's wasteful inflationary spending is keeping inflation
Nicole
high
Sullivan from
and
Mad
causing
TV.
interest rates to be the highest in a generation.
Tracy.
Canadians are facing tough choices, including whether they have no option other than to sell the family home. A Credit Canada representative told Bloomberg, quote, selling the house might end up being the only option for some homeowners. Last week, I heard of a nurse living in her car in the Okanagan. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
I feel it. I can only imagine that many other people
Mr.
feel it
Speaker, I
as
think
much
it's
or
fair to
more.
ask a question of the Conservatives when they talk about the inflationary spending. Are they talking about the programs that they're actually going to cut that are supporting people right now? Let's look at the measures that they're going to cut that they already voted against. Mr. Speaker, the question was about homelessness. When we put $1.3 billion on the table, they voted against it. Are they going to cut supports for the homeless? When we're talking about removing the GST so we can build more homes for middle-class families in this country, they intend to vote against it. Are they going to cut that too? Mr. Speaker, when we put money on the table for affordable housing, time and time they vote against it. Are they going to cut that too? They are reckless. They are not worth the risk. We are here to support the middle class.
I like it when they fire back instead of just explaining. He does that, so that's why I find dancing
The
Sean
Member
Fraser
for
pretty
Kelowna,
fun.
Lake Country.
Government that declared victory on inflation only to see it skyrocket. That's
right.
James from
Wound up
Langley,
this
BC
time.
told Global News that he and his husband are selling his home as a result of their mortgage payments and returning to the rental market. Mortgage defaults are climbing, with forced sales events up 10%, as just reported by the Toronto Real Estate Board. After 8 years with this NDP Liberal government, people are being forced to sell their homes. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
I think about having somebody move into this house,
Honourable Minister
move
of
into the
Housing.
basement or
Mr. Speaker, I'm
something.
pleased to share with my honourable colleague that I recently had a chance to sit down with the mayor of the township of
Must
Langley
been
and discuss
heard.
their application of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which this member and her party is promising to get rid of. We want to be there for the cities to help the very kind of people that she's asking about her in her question, that she promises to cut the support out from under should they form government. Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member is serious about building houses in this country, I would invite her to support Bill C-56, which is going to remove the tax on the construction of new homes, and I can't understand why they oppose it.
Right?
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent.
I wonder if Champagne's there today. He gets
Mr.
going
Speaker,
too.
after
This
8
guy's fun
years
every
of
time.
Liberal
Gerard.
government, we've seen compulsive deficits and unchecked inflationary spending.
So intense.
As a result, they've had a significant impact on increasing
Fox.
interest rates. According to Quebec's National Institute for Scientific Research, 1 in 5 Quebecers has difficulty repaying their debt and is likely to give up the keys to their home after 8 years of Liberal government. Will this government finally understand that managing things irresponsibly is expensive for Quebecers and all Canadians?
Then I have
the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Monsieur le Président.
Oh, Lord.
Mr. Speaker.
Give us a break, right?
We've just heard partisan arguments, but let me give you some facts. Canada's position is responsible. We have a AAA credit rating, and that was reconfirmed by credit agencies. We have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7. But if the Conservatives want to help us with the housing crisis, they need to support our legislation, C-56. That's the reality.
L'honorable député de Vancouver, Kingsway.
Millions of Canadians are going without their prescription medications because they can't afford them. Thousands
Dawn,
die.
right?
As a
Dawn
result,
Davis.
universal public pharmacare will cover everyone and save us billions of dollars. This weekend, NDP members sent a clear message to deliver it. Now, the Liberals themselves promised public pharmacare 26 years ago, and their own convention delegates voted for it in 2016, 2018, and 2021. Will the Liberals keep their word and finally deliver the public pharmacare that Canadians need and want?
We're in trouble with pharmacare, too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I have enormous
pharmaceutical companies
regard
have
for my
way too much
colleague. I know
control.
his commitment and passion to help reduce costs for Canadians is there. He would know, therefore, that the work that we've taken jointly with provinces and territories on bulk purchasing to see $3.5 billion in saving by working together to reduce costs for Canadians has happened. He knows that we've taken critical action on diseases, rare diseases and drugs for rare diseases. He knows that we've taken critical action on patented drugs. And yes, we are having a discussion on pharmacare legislation. I look forward to a continued productive conversation as we look at all of the health cares and priorities in keeping Canadians safe and healthy.
I prefer when they toss it back, right? When they go hard.
Mr. Speaker, it won't just save lives. Universal public drug coverage will save patients, workers, hospitals, and employers billions of dollars. It's time the Liberals took action. It's not just NDP activists who are saying it. All the studies and reports say the same thing. Even Liberal Party delegates voted for universal public pharmacare 3 conventions in a row. When will this government stop dragging its feet and deliver true universal pharmacare? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And one thing is clear, we need to bring down costs for drugs all across the country, and that's the action our government is taking. We are bringing down costs for almost $3.5 billion by buying medications together with the provinces and territories, by pooling our purchasing, and by working with our partners to find a way forward. And certainly we are working with all members here in the House to bring down the cost of medications.
What?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Leader of the Opposition continues to blame municipal mayors and councillors for our housing challenges, we've decided to work in collaboration with other levels of government, including our municipal partners. Our housing programs, including the Housing Accelerator Fund, incentivizes municipalities, nonprofits, and private sector to build more affordable
Every
homes,
time.
including purpose-built
This
rentals.
clown is straight from the
Minister
paper.
of Housing and Infrastructure, please share with the House the importance of working in
And he's always
partnership
boring.
with other levels of government and other housing stakeholders.
Uh-oh. Greg's coming, laying down the hammer.
Mr. Speaker, let me take this opportunity to thank my honourable colleague for his advocacy as the chair of our Housing Caucus for policies that will help change the way that cities in this country build home. What's more, Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague made an announcement last week on behalf of the federal government that we will be announcing more than $93 million in his city that's going to lead over the next 3 years to the construction of more than 2,600 homes and nearly 9,000 over the next decade. Mr. Speaker, we are going to require that cities build homes closer to transit, closer to post-secondary institutions, and I look forward to continuing my cooperation with that member so we see more homes built in the city of Hamilton.
Go Hamilton.
Now, député de Peterborough-Kawartha.
Canadians, Conservatives,
Right.
we all know after 8 years of this Prime Minister,
She ain't gonna take
he's
no
just
shit.
not worth the cost. But the Liberals and NDP still aren't receiving this message. Don't believe me? Take a look at the headlines. Average rent went up another 11% in past year, and even getting a roommate doesn't help much. Canada's rental crisis is getting worse, according to a new report that found that the average asking price for rent in September was $2,149, up by more than 11% more than a year ago. Enough. When will he stop his inflationary spending so Canadians can actually afford
Can't afford much more. Gotta quit that spending. Save us some money.
L'honorable ministre du Logement.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question, and I would point out that over the course of the past week, she attended the opening of a new affordable housing project that we funded in her own community, taking credit for a program that she in fact voted against. Mr. Speaker, the reality is when it comes to
Really
housing,
good if
we have
that's
a plan
true.
to
I don't know
change
if
the
it's
math
true.
So it works for builders. We have a plan to change the way that cities build homes. We have a plan to continue to invest in affordable housing and to grow the productive capacity of the workforce. Mr. Speaker, the opposition's plan is to raise taxes on home building and to cut funding that's going to build those homes. We're going to continue to build more houses
with
to
glow
make sure that
sticks.
everyone in this country can afford a roof over their head.
I don't like his program, but I like the way he delivers. I'm not going to lie about that.
L'honorable député de Peterborough-Kawartha.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister,
lady.
Canadians can't afford a house, and that's the reality. And we will continue to vote against inflationary spending that is driving up household debt. Canadians are paying more on their
Shell's laying
interest
down the
of their
law.
debt. They cannot afford a home. This is from Vicky, my single 30-plus daughter and 2 grandkids just moved in because she could no longer afford her $2,500 plus rent. She had to give up her job to move back into town with me. So I'm basically supporting all 3. So yeah, when will they learn how to manage money, decide about monetary policy, and actually build homes, not bureaucracy?
Good job, Michelle. Pretty good. Pretty good.
L'honorable député du Logement. L'honorable ministre du Logement.
Mr. Speaker, I assure
All
you
right.
I am not making
Go
this
for
up.
Sean. He's gonna
She's
dance.
talking about a lack of affordable housing in her community. We are literally discussing an affordable housing project funded by our government in Peterborough, and she voted against that particular policy. Mr. Speaker, she says she's going to continue to vote against these kinds of policies that are literally putting a roof over the head of some of her constituents, most vulnerable constituents in her community. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has an opportunity to get more homes built in her community. She can support Bill C-56, remove the tax on new home construction, and invite some of her colleagues to do it with her.
He's entertaining, guys. He's a little young to be the next leader. Would have said that about Trudeau too, maybe. I think it's Champagne's going to be the next leader.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal
Marty
government,
Morantz, right?
$500 million in
Yeah.
inflationary deficits have fueled 40-year inflation highs, causing the Bank of Canada to raise interest rates. In the midst of a housing crisis, mortgage defaults and forced home sales are on the rise. People are losing their homes. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister finally put an end to his inflationary spending so that Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
A lot of questions about inflationary issues. I would have thought that we would be discussing more about Hamas and Gaza
share some
today,
facts.
but
Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio and the lowest deficit in the G7. That is a fact. Canada has a AAA rating. That is also a fact. And you know what else is a fact, Mr. Speaker? The opposition, which claims to care about the housing challenges Canadians face, is
She's a clown,
blocking
Leona.
Bill C-56, which experts across the
Lemon
country
face,
say
annoying voice clown.
is essential to get more rental homes built. That is sheer, utter hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker.
Squeezed up lemon face man. I used to be a fan. There was a time I was like, oh, this new Liberal government's going to be able to accomplish some things. And they have accomplished some things. They're just not good things.
Mr. Speaker, this government's policies have forced the Bank of Canada to raise interest rates 10 times, and the impact is devastating. The latest example, 20% of mortgages with the big banks are now in negative amortization. This means the monthly payment doesn't cover the interest, so the amount owing keeps going up. It's a loan that never ends. When will the Liberals put an end to their inflationary deficits so that rates can come down and Canadians can stay in their homes? Honourable Minister.
It might seem like it's the same question a lot of times or similar questions, but financial concerns,
I'm looking
times are
forward
tough,
to the
right?
day where the Conservative Party opposite will finally vote in favor of things that will do precisely what people need to help keep the roofs over their heads. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that they will vote in favor of what the construction professionals and the municipality, the Federation of Municipalities have said. They're delighted that we've cut the GST on the construction of new homes.
We'll start getting into some of the interesting players, I think. Getting into the show now. So,
based on an online consultation, the federal government has tossed out the Quebec winners of a competition to design a monument to the mission in Afghanistan. Well, the experts at Léger have studied that consultation, and they say the approach was not scientific. According to Léger, the results cannot be interpreted as the opinion of members of the armed forces. Any use of these data generalized to the public is faulty. Mr. Speaker, the basis for eliminating the Quebec bid was faulty. Will they give the contract to the DISCRIMINATION team?
I could understand them reading all the time if they were reading the language that isn't their first language.
Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his question. Mr. Speaker, I think we all agree on the importance of our veterans, and that's why the department conducted a poll. Over 10,000 Canadians answered the poll, and most of them were veterans. And the concept that was selected was by Stimson, and people felt that that better reflected the sacrifice and the bravery of our veterans. Mr. Speaker, we will always support our veterans, and that's why we chose the winning concept. The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Mr. Speaker, this is from Léger, the leading experts on polls. They say the federal government's poll is not scientific and that the results are not reliable. Even Louise Arbour, former Supreme Court Justice, had to come out on Thursday to ask the federal government to play by their own rules. It's come to this, Mr. Speaker. There's a limit how far you can go to shut Quebec out. Will the government follow its own rules, listen to Justice Arbour, and award the contract to the DISCRIMINATION team? The Honourable Minister of Veterans. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, and I look forward to working with him on the Veterans Affairs Committee. All members here recognize the importance of our veterans, and that's why we conducted the poll. And the vast majority of respondents were included veterans and their family members, and they felt that the design we chose best reflected the sacrifice and the bravery of our veterans. Mr. Speaker, I have a question for my honourable colleague. Does he want us to ignore the expressed wishes of our veterans? The honourable member for Foothills.
Years of inflationary spending and carbon taxes, food prices have skyrocketed,
John Barlow
and many Canadians had empty tables at Thanksgiving. This is because of broken Liberal promises and a Liberal-made financial crisis. Canadian grocery CEOs did not commit to meet the Liberals' lower food prices by Thanksgiving. Now, as a result, many Canadians can't afford to feed their families, a quarter are skipping meals, and millions of Canadians had to rely on food banks for their Thanksgiving dinner. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister end his inflationary spending so Canadians can afford to feed their families?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker.
Okay, this guy is a real
The
clown.
leader was having a self-aggrandizing, goodwill hunting delusion in an apple orchard. Our government was focused on stabilizing food prices for middle-class Canadians by calling on the 5 grocery chain CEOs to produce action plans that would make a difference for Canadians. Our government is now tracking and monitoring and holding the grocery chains accountable. While the Conservatives talk turkey, we'll talk results for Canadians.
Boop, 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 doo, 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 doo. He's funny.
Colleagues.
Guys,
I
you're
saw
pissing
that
Greg
the
off.
member from Foothills had difficulty hearing the answer to the question that he had asked. I asked that we try to keep it down. And to all members, I ask that they please...
Come on, sit down, Greg.
Which will not cause disturbance in the House. The honourable member from Foothills.
This is his
broken Liberal promises
couple of
and
weeks
broken Liberals
vacation
making
week in the
light
middle.
of the food crisis does not put food on the table. Many Canadians are starving.
Heat up, John. Get cross.
Broken promise to lower food prices by Thanksgiving. That is not what happened. Food prices are up 7% over last year. Now, the Prime Minister promised to lower food prices by Thanksgiving dinner. He failed. Another broken promise. So will the Prime Minister promise to lower his out-of-control spending so Canadians can afford a Christmas dinner, or will that be another promise broken?
Good, John. Good job. Like, he brings it. They're clapping. It's fun. But Greg isn't. Greg can't take this. Must be so quiet at his house. Well, well, well. What do we have going on here, guys? What is going on? Okay, this is weird. I'll admit this is strange, what we have going on here.
Colleagues.
Okay, well, lay it down. Lay it down. What you got?
We're doing so well on a day that was on a very sensitive issue internationally. I ask you to please continue with your good behavior for the day, and I ask in particular the member from Grand Prairie, please, to keep the comments to the time that he is asking questions. The Honourable Minister.
Interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on this side of the House, we continue to do the hard work to ensure that Canadian families are supported. Just look to our investment to create a nationwide system of early learning and childcare, or look to our Canada Child Benefit. On this side of the House, we are making investments to make sure that families can buy the food, can get the school supplies and the sneakers that their kids need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The funny thing about this lady is she still believes. You can see she still believes in what she's doing. That's what I get a kick out of that clown. Because she doesn't know.
Dufferin Caledon.
A hoax or a hoax or
Well,
whatever.
Mr. Speaker, they must have a very different definition of hard work than Conservatives have, because after 8 years of this Liberal government, we know that food prices are out of control.
That's right.
I went to the grocery store in Orangeville this past weekend for Thanksgiving. A loaf of Wonder Bread was $4.40. That's the definition of Liberal hard work. And how do we get
$5.89
there,
for the
Mr.
bread I
Speaker?
bought.
Massive
A loaf.
inflationary deficits, a carbon tax that's driving up the cost of everything.
Right.
The fake photo ops of the Prime Minister isn't going to fix anything. Will they cut the carbon tax, balance the budget so Canadians can pay for food?
It's going. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, get him going. Woo! Get him going. Oh, Lord. They're not listening, Greg. Sit down.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is fighting for
Lord.
Canadians on affordability every step of the
fun.
way. We're
It's
fully
funny.
seized with addressing the
Turnbull is a
affordability
clown.
challenges that Canadians are facing by calling in the top 5 grocery CEOs to work with us to stabilize food prices. Conservatives can call this a photo op. I think calling decisive action for Canadians on affordability a photo op says more about them than it does about us, Mr. Speaker. Regardless of the Conservatives' attacks, we'll stay focused on the pressing needs of Canadians.
He came out firing last time. I thought he might again.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The honourable member for Pontiac.
See, now this lady is here. She's going to tee
Small
up
businesses and
a
medium-sized
Liberal,
businesses,
and she's going to be doing a bad job of it.
At the heart of Quebec's economy. And that's why it's so important for the government to support them at crucial points in their economic development. I'd like to hear what the Minister of Tourism and Economic Development for the regions of Quebec.
You see what she's doing?
I'd like her to tell us what the Liberal government is doing to support small and medium-sized businesses and especially
I find it's a wasted
Indigenous entrepreneurs. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for the regions of Quebec.
It's a wasted opportunity because they could set it up so much more to make the answer more interesting, but they don't. They're lazy.
Women-led and particularly Indigenous-led businesses. We announced funding of $100,000 for a company in Gatineau. It was founded by two brilliant women, Krisha and Melanie, and they celebrate the diversity and richness of Indigenous cultures. We celebrate their success, and we're there to support them. Happy Small Business Week.
Of course, happy Small Business Week.
The honourable member for Edmonton Millwoods.
It's pretty well spoken too.
Anti-pipeline, anti-resource development policies, hundreds of billions of dollars of project investments have fled Canada and taken countless powerful paychecks away from Canadian workers. These Liberals
better
just
than
aren't
holding
worth
the paper.
cost. Conservatives warned the Liberals that their plans to steamroll provinces by giving themselves unprecedented powers over provincial infrastructure, industry, natural resources through their No More Pipelines bill, Bill C-69, was unconstitutional. Will they repeal Bill C-69 now that the Supreme Court has ruled it unconstitutional? Yes or no?
It's very well spoken. Tim Whipple?
L'honorable ministre de l'Environnement et des Changements Climatiques.
I would like to
All
correct
right.
my colleague
My man.
and the fact
Steven.
that the Supreme Court last week issued an opinion. It was not a decision.
Love his English,
Let me
man.
give you some elements.
No, he's cool.
If the members want a briefing by the Justice Department on the difference, we would be happy to provide that to them, Mr. Speaker. Let me quote from the Supreme Court on what they said. This appeal is not whether Parliament can enact legislation to protect the environment. It is clear that Parliament can do so under the heads of power assigned to it under the Constitution Act of 1867. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Exactly.
I don't know where he was all morning, or all question period.
L'honorable député de Brant. Je m'excuse.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this government's ongoing corruption, we have yet another scandal. Conflicts of interest, nepotism, abuse of power, and now we have allegations of criminality around the contracting practices in the top offices of this government. The $54 million price tag for the Arrive scam app is just the tip of the iceberg. Last week, the NDP Liberal Coalition voted to shut down the testimony of the Auditor General's review of this scandal. Why?
Kingpin wants an answer. From Spider-Man, it looks like Kingpin.
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague knows very well that committees make their own decisions in terms of the work they want to do. What we have said, Mr. Speaker, is that at all times we expect people to comply with the contracting policies of the Government of Canada, and those that decide to do something that is worthy of a criminal investigation will obviously be investigated by the appropriate authorities. Absolutely. And we don't comment on investigations that the RCMP might decide to do on any of these issues.
Okay, we're having some audio issues in the House, I believe.
Mr. Speaker, after 8
Right,
years
Luke,
of Liberal
what up?
management, it's scandal upon scandal. We've just learned the RCMP has opened a criminal investigation into ArriveCan, which cost Canadians $54 million for nothing. It was a Montreal firm, Bottler, who sounded the alarm. For one contract, a senior Liberal government official strongly recommended that Bottler work with the same ArriveCan firm, GC Strategies, a two-person firm with no office and no computer expertise. Bottler identified what looks an awful lot like an organized system of collusion. After 8
Collusion's
years
not a good
of
word.
turning a blind eye, will the Liberals tell us who's getting richer at our expense when it comes to awarding contracts?
Our buddies, our friends. That's who's getting rich. Who did you think we were going to get to?
The
Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I've said repeatedly, we expect all those who work for the Government of Canada to follow the contracting rules, Treasury Board rules and other rules that apply. In the case of these allegations, Mr. Speaker, there could be some criminal activity, and we expect the appropriate authorities to investigate, and that's precisely what this government will allow them to do.
L'honorable député de Scarborough Centre.
Speaker, in communities across Canada and in my riding of Scarborough Centre, many Canadians are finding it difficult to find an affordable place to call home.
She's teeing up another.
Newcomers, we must work to ensure
if you know that you're teeing up your teammate,
to the housing crisis.
Why wouldn't you take some time
of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship inform the House of
to make it interesting?
To tackle the labor
This lady's one of the worst.
And build more homes for Canadians.
Straight from the paper, man. From that book.
Mr.
Speaker, immigration is key to our economic growth, and now more than ever, we need skilled trades in this country. That's why this summer we launched a global express entry system into this country to make sure the skilled labor workers could get in here in a faster pace. Simply put, more workers at a faster pace to get all those homes built. We need those workers. We need them from abroad. We need them here. They'll get the homes built.
L'honorable député de Timmins Bay James.
The planet is on fire, and we just had Suncor
going.
CEO Rich Kruger tell us how he's going to
awesome.
maximize profits for big oil while the rest of us suffer a climate catastrophe. In a year of record profits, they fired 1,500 workers. In a year of unprecedented climate fire, their climate solution is to massively increase fossil fuel burning. Big oil is laughing at this government.
Hate to interrupt the member. I hate to interrupt members.
I think you kind of like it, Greg. I think you kind of like it, bud.
I hate to interrupt the member, but I'm having trouble hearing the member. Can the member please continue? 20 seconds left on the clock.
What's his name?
Thank you, sir.
Tuvok
Truth certainly hurts the Conservative Party.
Star Trek.
As the planet burns, and they're supporting the massive increase in fossil fuel burning, which is why they backed Rich Kruger from CEO. The question is, what concrete steps will this government take to hold big oil to account to protect Alberta jobs, Canadian communities, and our planet from the fires that are happening from the climate crisis?
Here.
Old Charlie Angus has a new fan. I think I've been watching him. I think he might be fun. I think he's one of the fun ones.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Guilbeault is one of the fun ones.
In fact, our government have taken and are taking a number of measures to ensure that big oil companies do their fair share when it comes to fighting climate change.
Today.
We're the first G7 countries to have eliminated fossil fuel subsidies 2 years ahead of schedule, something that the Conservative Party of Canada would never do. They want to make pollution-free, Mr. Speaker. We've also implemented measures to reduce methane emission by at least 40% by 2025 and 75% by 2030, which will make it one of the most ambitious measures in the world to reduce methane emission from the oil and gas sector. We have many more things coming, including a cap on the emissions of the oil and gas sector, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Anyways, so Guilbeault usually gets fired up and wound up. Today he seems to be
Mr. Speaker,
pretty easy
after
going.
the Governor General's lavish
an
spending
independent.
on international travel, we've learned her office spent over $117,000 on dry cleaning since 2018, an average of $1,800 per month.
Did you hear what he just said?
I did some calculations based on the going rate for these services.
$1,800 a month
rates she's been spending
since 2018
that's
on
an average
dry cleaning.
Of 3 outfits a day, 365
That's gonna
days
be an
a
issue.
year. Why doesn't the government cut her $33 million budget? What are they waiting for? Because she's clearly incapable of managing taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly.
That's embarrassing. That's going to be a thing. That's interesting. Good. Yeah, we're getting late on time.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Governor General
What is she going to
has
say to
done
that?
important work for Canada.
$33 million worth of important
we
work?
expect every dollar she spends to be done in a rigorous and conscientious way. Thank you.
That was quick.
Well, this brings to the end of question period. I understand there's going to be a number of points of order.
That's peculiar that they're wrapping up that quickly. Well, it got really exciting there at the end, guys. So that's pretty much the show. Hi, I'm Ehren. This is QPC, Question Period Canada. It's hot. I've got shorts. We're doing medium length videos, this long form stuff, live. It's a lot of fun. We're learning. We'll get better at it. Continue to watch. Give me some feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't. And we'll be back tomorrow for some more Question Period. That is it. We're out for now. And thank you all for watching. Again, comment, subscribe, like, share, all of that. Be in touch with me. Let me know what you think. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm EhrenEmm.